Welcome back to New Money. We're discussing retirement and financial planning. My guests are Lesejo Monering and Jordan Toy. If you want to email me, you'll see my address there. Let's just talk about risk for a moment. Because obviously, if you want certainty and security, you're going to be much more linked. Your portfolio is going to be a very different portfolio to a growth portfolio. But when you have a growth portfolio, one of the important components is you've got to take on risk. Mm-hmm. And how do you get, knowledge empowers. But people here, yes, portfolios can drop, but when they drop, they get paranoid, maybe you've given me the wrong advice. How do you deal with this risk in terms of explaining to clients you have to take on risk to get to beat inflation and to get better long-term returns?
Yeah, so risk is, I think it's multifaceted, Bryan. So we can speak about investment risk, and we talked about performances earlier on. But to someone who only has one portfolio, one investment, and they're in retirement, a -10 withdrawal or -10 drop down can be quite significant if you're drawing an income from that. So I think it's important to understand our defined risk as what could go wrong and how do we mitigate against that. So it's understanding what could go wrong and how do we plan for it. And importantly, risk is very personal. So what's risky to you might not be risky to me. And it's important for clients to understand what is my risk and what is important that if this happens, how do I come back? How do I navigate? What is my plan B or plan C scenario? So, and it is important to have risk in a portfolio. So when we talk about, as professionals, risk, it's saying we need to get returns that are going to beat inflation. But again, it's different for each client, and we have to get, that's actually what our job is, understanding the risk, your individual risk, and managing that risk to make sure that at the end of the day, your outcomes are more are favorable to you and your circumstances. And how do we plan for that? And once we understand risk, then the plans speak to how do we protect you as a client and also what your money needs to be doing. So it's quite multifaceted. There's other types of risks that we talk about, cash flow being one, investment risk being one, health changes to health, lifestyle changes. You plan for one thing and then you're going through a divorce. That changes everything. So that's half of your assets now gone, or children. So there's a lot of changes, and this is where risk comes in, and it's personal and it changes all the time. So this is why we also emphasize that we need to check in with our clients at least once a year, because something that you might not consider risk might actually be risk. So it's important to keep in touch with your advisor and to make sure that you're very honest and open about what is going on, because you might not even be aware. So I also call it blind spots. What are the blind spots that you could be missing?
Because when you talk about your financial advisor, clients have to understand it's a two-way street. You're in touch with clients, Jordan, and you're getting information from them. But things are happening all the time that you aren't aware about. And so it's incumbent, and I believe essential, that a client phones their financial advisor and not only waits for your call and explains to you, talk about divorce, talk about all the different changes, circumstance changes, health and all that. So how do you handle the risk aspect, empowering and clients understanding? Don't worry about taking on risk. I understand corporate risk. And we've got so many scams. I mean, I've seen one recently where Cyril Ramaphosa is actually talking about an investment that can't go wrong. We've seen the Musk, we've seen all these other people. How do you handle that?
So that's definitely something we're quite concerned about. Is sort of AI has a lot of powerful benefits, but we're seeing it increasingly employed in sort of impersonation scams and fraud and things like that. So from a security perspective, that's a whole nother discussion on how do you sort of validate the information you're looking at. But in terms of risk, and I think Lesejo summed it up very well there in terms of the different areas, we look at it fundamentally when I sit with a client. It's, well, what do you understand risk to mean? What is your definition of risk? Is it the uncertainty of the outcome, or is it volatility? I think strictly from an academic perspective, we view it as volatility. How volatile is the price of the underlying investment? And just to come back to your point, you mentioned lifestyle changes in a client's life. And I think that's a key discussion to have. And there has to be open lines of communication between you and the client because, as you said, like people's lives move on and life changes and your circumstances change. And does that expose you to other risks? Not just within your portfolio, what sectors are you exposed to and what risks does that bring in your personal circumstances? If you go from a young single individual to someone with a wife, a house with a bond on it and a family on the way, you're exposed to a lot of different potential risks than you might have been before, and risks that you may need to cover. Disability, protecting your income, ensuring that there'll be a roof over your family's head if you're not around anymore. So I think that there's...
Paying off debt.
Yeah, paying off debts.
Educating your children,
of course.
Such an important component in any financial plan. Because the combination of life insurance is, the first two are easy. How much debt have you got? Cover it. 2, what will it cost to educate your children? There's some policies that come in with that, but how will that? And then how will you provide your family with an income, understanding inflation? So, as you say, very critical. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you there.
No,
I wanted to add there.
So yeah, I think you've summed it up really nicely. There's just all these different aspects to risk, and you've got to make sure that we're looking at it holistically, not just risk in your portfolio. What are some of the risk areas in your broader financial circumstances?
Yeah. Leseka, I've got an email that you're going to deal with. Rom in Johannesburg said, I've received quotes for critical illness and disability cover, and they vary materially. How would I know which are the best policies to buy?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very common misconception and confusion about what is what and how do it. So I think what Ron can consider is that critical illness will pay out in the event of an illness claim. So illness claim, it's usually the big severe illnesses. So it's just stroke, heart attacks, cancer, which is something that's common. So that would be, and it's usually a lump sum payment that would pay out in the event of any claims. And depending on the type of policy that he has or considering, some of them will pay based on severity, meaning if you have first stage cancer, they might have a specific policy concerning that. If you have, terminal illness, so there's different definitions and a different trigger points. Disability, but the fact that you're disabled does not mean, so if you have a disability claim, it's not often, so if you have cancer, it doesn't always lead to
result in a permanent disability.
Result in a permanent disability claim. So the fact that you have disability does not necessarily mean that if you're ill and you're booked off for a certain time that you can claim against your permanent disability. It is very important because also if you're looking at the stats, we're living much longer, but the chances of us incurring illnesses is very likely. So it is important to have I say to my clients, have a separate illness cover protection and then have your permanent disability. So permanent disability also is usually an impairment of sort that affects your earning ability on a day-to-day basis. So that's if you have an injury, a car accident, and you lose a limb, and now you need to be on a wheelchair. That would be a typical disability claim. And then again, you have an option of a lump sum option that will pay out, or you will have an income replacement. So they would usually pay 75% of your income in the event of a disability claim. And again, it depends on what the policy says. So some of them will pay up until a certain, usually about 65. And again, it also depends. So some of them, if they might pay a lump sum, but again, they'll look at a table to determine how severe are you, how severely disabled are you, and then they will pay according to those terms. But again, to Ron's point, he needs to understand the risks. Does he need a lump sum, and when does he need a lump sum? So typically what we would advise clients is that you need to have a lump sum, because when you are going through a serious medical condition such as a cancer scare or whatever, the last thing you want is to be worried about finances. So it does help, and it is important to plan between the two, to say if I'm unable to work, or if for example, some of the policies, if it's a work policy, they might say you have to be back to work within a certain period. But then you might not want to go back to work. So you need to have options that will allow you to actually suit your circumstances. If you have exhausted your sick leave and don't want to go back to work, if you have your own policy and your own security, you can plan much better than if you didn't have the options.
And also, own or similar or any occupation definition, and then something even more critical, that is there are different premium patterns. There's a fixed number with a fixed number with escalation, and then also a age-related. So you've got to understand.
Yeah.
Jordan, let me just talk to your, so he says, Paul in Randburg says, how do estate investment and retirement planning fit into an overall financial plan? Surely a comprehensive financial plan should integrate all these elements. We talk about estate tax, investment, and retirement planning. How do you see a financial plan differentiating, or do you see the financial plan being the umbrella?
Of course. So I think the financial plan has got to be the umbrella, and it should encompass or at least touch on all of these aspects, because they've all got to work in concert together. You know, your investment doesn't operate in a vacuum, neither does an estate plan. So, I mean, even if we're sitting with someone who's just started working and we're investing for the long term, ultimately for their retirement, well, at that point in time, we've already got to start thinking about, I mean, we're planning for retirement in 30, 40 years. The estate planning should at least be part of that plan, because we need to incorporate everything. We can't plan for one goal and forget everything else that needs to come to work with it. Otherwise, you have this plan that sort of falls short in several different areas. So, you know, whether you are at retirement or just starting out in your working career, when we start building that financial plan, it should, you know, there will be a different focus area in terms of the timeline of that entire plan, where we are now. But the whole timeline has to be incorporated. And estate planning, to, you know, build this entire thing and then forget to consider what's going to happen at retirement and when you eventually pass away. How do you want to give to your beneficiaries? What's the most efficient way to do that? All of that's got to form part of that financial plan, certainly.
I think what's important, 85% of people when they get to retirement are in a bad financial situation. And younger people say, well, retirement's so...
Yeah.
It's so much easier when you're young to put a little bit away for yourself, not to have those problems. And I can tell you what's amazing about this program is I spoke at the beginning, 6 months of the year already gone. Well, half an hour for our program doesn't last long. We don't get through so many emails, and I apologize to those who've sent emails in. I will answer those emails, or someone in my office will. But regular reviews and assessments are essential to success in any endeavor, and your financial plan is no exception. Even if everything seems to be on track, it's worthwhile to schedule a brief check-in with your advisor or financial planner. It's a two-way street. While financial planners should stay in regular contact with their clients, they are not always aware of changes in your personal circumstance. That's why it's important that you take the initiative to inform your financial advisor when every significant something changes. Lesejo, Jordan, thank you for joining me this evening. It's important to note that our program is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program, we'll be dealing with short-term insurance, and if you need to get hold of me, my details will appear on the screen. I'd like to thank you for watching, and good night.